Welcome to another spring special. In succession with my forest levels, I figured it's time to give credit to their more sodden and moist relative, swamps. Swamps or wetlands rely on so much vegetation and rainfall, which could often lead to floods within the vicinity, quicksand, saturated soil, and sometimes vicious creatures. They're very rich in nutrients, but often uninhabitable due to these conditions and erosion, even though they're absorbent and prevent damage to other landforms, so they're self-contained. They also tend to be beautiful and lively places, despite the boggy smell. And they're the most frequent and adaptable environments throughout the world, excepting in the poles. Aside from wetlands, marshes, bogs, and bayous have similar characteristics, so I'll count them too. And it's a rarity if I should ever visit one, even reading about it. These levels are often distinctive by their environmental hazards like toxic water or slippery conditions, even hostile inhabitants. But they seem to be the most intriguing next to forests. So let's honor those hefty, tricky terrains. For a quick start, let's highlight a short though ferocious level from Earthworm Jim. It's not a problem. I actually thought this was the origin of Jim's companion Snot, since it's made mostly of mucus and the like. But because of the aesthetics, I'd still consider it to be similar to a swamp or a bog. Jim's mission is to avoid major mucus and mucus phlegm brain within 3 cruel rounds, each one more vicious than the last. In this bungee jumping competition, mucus makes every savage attempt to break Jim's cord or into the razor-sharp spike walls. Watch out for phlegm brain dwelling below as he awaits you for lunch. With each round, mucus tends to roundhouse you more often, and his cord gets thicker and harder to break. Not to mention, it's the 6th level in the game, mostly Super Nintendo, after the harsh level 5 and those tumultuous tube races. This was quite the midway point indeed, and it very much looks like a slimy swamp planet despite the disgusting material around, and being it's a canyon. The reflective massive bog, the home of cruel creatures, the immense green all around, and the resemblance to slime was just enough to make this list. Little did I know that there were 3 areas of Maridia, all in Super Metroid. The underwater base, the sandy area, and the rocky area. Since the latter is more swampy than the others, I shall do them all in one go. Remember that glass tube that connects Brinstar with Kraid's lair? Well, all you gotta do is powerbomb the thing and shatter it, after destroying Kraid himself. Head to the upper layer and you shall arrive. Also, make sure you got the gravity suit handy. The majority of it is underwater, that's why it's so low on the list. Plus, if you don't have a guide or just aren't a hardcore Metroid fan, you'd spend nearly an eternity wandering your mind away, till eventually you speed through a maze and encounter Botswoom. and soon Drakkhen, who's twice as annoying until she leaves you room for shocking her. But the hard stuff had just begun as you traverse through the rest of the way, even not figuring out which quicksand patch goes to where. But once you get the hang down, the space jump and the plasma beam are yours for the taking. It's strange that Maridia actually has 3 environments, and the surface areas are the ones that show the swamp displays like the thick hanging vines or the rich vegetation. But it's all worth it once it connects back to the red upper Bryn star again. No wonder CJ usually despises this level so much.
Too fond of. I hate you, Maridia!
Still, I wonder if there's any real-life swamp or marsh that actually tends to have 3 environments in one vicinity. You tell me. While I'm not too fond with Majora's Mask, I guess the second best would have to do. The Swamp of Evil from A Link to the Past. The conditions on accessing this place is rather unusual. It is at the same location as the Desert of Mystery, although you need to play the flute in order to get to the exact location where a stone can be lifted to reveal a portal transporting you to the Dark World. The plateau is at the most southern part, and you're met by an endless torrential rainfall. Normally, swamps are accompanied with moisture, rich vegetation, and saturated spongy soil, which makes structures prone to erosion. Although this one didn't do so well absorbing the sky water. Link can access another heart container in a nearby cavern, although he'd need the Ether Medallion in order to enter the Misery Mire and hold the Infinite Showers. The Bombos Medallion can be found elsewhere in the wetlands. Plus, the 6th temple overall was pretty interesting, if you know what you're doing, of course. I would always prefer swamp over a desert, as it's moist, cool, and full of life. And I despise the heat and humidity. So, for an entry found in the Zelda Juggernaut, I guess it's a decent choice. The swamp or marsh in Drakkhen is just as tumultuous as any other wetland in the world, or in video games. En route north of the open plains is where you'll find it, but only after Prince Hordkin grants you the power to enter it. If you're lucky to get past the shark upon your second visit. The watery quadrant is quite significant here, as the swamp is, a wetland, and they're always prone to flooding, but marshes tend to be less absorbent on account of shrubs instead of trees. So it makes the most sense. This is primarily the home of Prince Hadkin's own stronghold, although it's not the only place that racks up the ante. You're assigned by the sister of Prince Hordkin to head to the marsh to investigate another castle. But along the way you encounter some centaurs, crocs, and mucus. Much like it's not a problem. Gross! Avoid those tombstones as you won't meet a certain Cerberus. Pretty simple. I get so confused with all these names, but basically the ruler hates unwanted visitors, so he's got something to hide. No biggie once you've learned the unlock spell, that is. This place is overrun by zombies, fiery spirits, I know, ironic. Infinite bats with a soul-draining chamber, and a flooded room that tends to have a live arm of water. Eventually, the prisoner reveals that the ruler has been captured and taken to the snowy wastes up north, within the hostage of Feral Princess Naktka. You actually head there again to alert the royal, in which she'll inform you of Prince Hordkin's assault, and gives you the Drakkhen cuirass and sword as implorement to hurry before he unites his forces to attack her. And that's pretty much it. The marsh does tend to be a bit confusing in terms of layout and whoever those rulers are. Like I said before, Drakkhen was known as a Game of Thrones before the story existed. It kinda does grind your gears, but as long as you have the unlock spell, and most at level 3 with your whole team, and meet up with Hordkin's sister after the shark ordeal, you should be good to go, even though it's a quarter and soon half of the journey through. Lest we forget about the Sylph Cave from Final Fantasy IV, out of all the swamp levels in the Juggernaut, this was the one that stood out to me, even more than Kina's marshes. While it's usually classified as a cave, I'd still consider it as a swamp level overall. Within the dwarf underworld, Cecil and the gang came across a wicked wetland that nearly has every trait to one. Whether it be poisonous pools which require Rosa for using levitation and magic consumption to avoid damage, it has abundant vegetation, a lush environment, and it's home to some very cruel creatures. Not to mention you're always being affected by ailments, and swamps are too prone to disease. The worst being the bog witches that have the tendency to turn you into a toad, thus skyrocketing your vulnerability and making constant spells negating your treatment. Even more gruesome, it's a home to those infamous Marlboros, emanating rapid and immense ailments onto every combatant. Again, it takes a lot to survive the place. Evil dreamers can often be a pain with sleep status, and it's often easy to get lost in this meadow labyrinth. Much like any wetland, it's a very tedious landform, and this is no exception. Be warned and make sure you stock on high levels, sundries, and be dedicated to navigate the nasty terrain. If you're lucky to find the Sylph Cache, it's a hell of a lot better reward than those puny fairies that live there. At least it gives the wounded warrior Yang a second chance to shine, so it's not all for naught. It is a beautiful though deadly place to roam, and it did make a brief appearance in my two-parter fanfic. Still can't wait to leave that forsaken fenland. We can't possibly forget about the tricky wetland level of the Lost Vikings, the bubble sector in the prehistoric era. Out of all the sectors, this is one of the most dangerous and relatable to a swamp level. It's home to the usual creatures like dinos and snails, but its atmosphere is most fitting to any fenland. Of course, like how any swamp level tends to be, there's a toxic lake in which the Vikings can't swim. It's smack dab in a moor, and of course the most dangerous place is getting across that said body, by having the Vikings trek onto temporary bubbles. Eric and Olaf aren't too much of a problem. Balog, however, shall be a steep problem. His platforming ain't as flexible, so memorization and timing is an absolute must, unless you shall meet a sinking fate. Once you get that out of the way, there's still some dedication to find the items necessary to progress, and the enemies there can be quite hairy. Out of all the swamp levels, this stands out in terms of climate, aesthetics, and some challenging platforming. A little dedication should come a long way in this stressful sump, and many levels to come. This was one of the most fun areas in all of Sinnoh, even containing Pokemon you can't really find anywhere else in the region. They do change daily, but trust me, this awesome landscape has marshy portions, tall grass, and tons of awesome choices added to your roster. This was the first of the safari zones I'd encountered, as I hadn't discovered one from Johto yet. Although, it's a little tedious on catching them as you can't battle them, only using bait or mud to draw them in, and it's usually a matter of luck. Plus you're limited with only 500 steps and 30 safari balls. Still though, just catching Pokemon that aren't available anywhere else in Sinnoh makes it all worthwhile. And it's a cool place popular in the summer for water types. The downsides are that their catch rate isn't very massive, and I can't always rely on the Safari Zone to catch wild Pokemon. But it's a nice little distraction, and it seems to be the most famous activity in Pastoria City. And if things get too hectic, I'll just stick with the routes near the waterfronts instead. Oh, come on! Marble Garden was just so irresistible to be on this list. And while to some it may seem like a forest level in terms of environment and aesthetics, I'd rather consider it as more of a forested swampland. After all, swamps tend to share traits with their neighboring woodlands, and the type of swamp can still be in forests. Convenient, eh? Anyway, the Marble Garden, aka Level 3 of Angel Island, was once a lost city. Although, thanks to Robotnik's hazardous shenanigans searching for the Chaos and Super Emeralds, this place was ridden with pricky bots and many traps. Boggy heavy soil? Check. Lush and numerous green trails covered by woods? Check. Tumultuous landscapes and some quirky platforming and some quagmires and lost ruins? Check. Sonic, Tails, or Knuckles can really get their feet sticky or burning around these parts. Whether it be the tumultuous layout, the numerous enemies and traps that lurk here, or the constant sudden shifts Robotnik and the Drillbot make on a constant basis. So prepare some steep and deep standards, although it seems to be a fun ride at the end of the day. Plus it gives my favorite Tails an extra chance to shine as he makes some technical maneuvers and relies on his flight the rest of the way. Second place was easy to choose from as the DKC series tend to have excellent, fun, and memorable environmental levels, including swamps. Crank Quay is where the party is. The third portion of Crocodile Isle has some of the best murky mires in all of gaming. This happens to be a tie between two of the most prominent bayous, Barrel Bayou and Crockhead Clamber. The first level of the quay, as well as the first of its kind to feature a swamp, it's got everything you'd expect for a wetland. Whether it be a bog the conchs can't tread on, grassy landforms, a shaded though far from tranquil area, wary traversing, and vicious creatures galore including dragonflies, crocs, zingers, and the nefarious kremlings. Even having a soothing tune consisting of crickets in its own song, Bayou Boogie. Aside from the technical time-sensitive directional barrels. And of course, my favorite animal buddy Rambi lends a horn through the majority of this level. The second best is Crockhead Clamber, in which most of these crockheads pop out of the murky water to help the conchs traverse through. Aside from the many flitters, small landforms, and weed stalks that could sometimes be occupied by the annoying clingers. This area is the third swamp level, just as tranquil as Barrel Bayou, and it consists of several kremlings, zingers, crockheads, and dragonflies. I don't know why, maybe it's the introvert in me, but I always prefer the more quiet and scenic swamp areas over the abandoned ship or the underwater ruins. Everything about the climate and even the music is just kind of relaxing. Sure, there is one other known as Mudhole Marsh, although it's a real shame there's only 3 known swamps in Diddy's Conquest, and apparently the whole franchise. I'm sorely disappointed. Also, one of my favorite ladies, Dixie Kong, is exceptionally useful around these parts, so win-win. Might as well make the best of what we have, but I hope there'd be more like these murky and quiet levels in the future. Alright, we counted down 9 of my favorite swamp levels and marsh levels. But before we get to number 1, let's bring out some honorable mentions. Any player can tell you that Bubble Gloop Swamp is by far the best and a fan favorite when it comes to swamp levels, Block Fort included, and it's not puzzling to see why. There are lots of things to cover, like any distinctive world. Although it is home to the iconic, useful Stilt Stride, for Kazooie to traverse through various environmental hazards like bone-chilling water, quicksand, or in this case, the piranha-infested rivers located throughout. Been a staple item ever since. Not to mention it takes about 180 notes and 7 jiggies to get here. but you should get used to the whopping amounts by now. Like any other swamp, it's the main environment for poisonous creatures, such as those yellow and random red frog bidbits you come across, with a dragonfly here and there. And just like any other fenland, it's prone to some wary platforming, especially if you tend to reach very high places. It takes a little well-planned dedication to get around, especially when trying to find some dry land or dealing with those narrow passages. It introduced Croctus, several little crocs that love to feed on Kazooie's eggs, the giant turtle Tank Top who houses the a cappella Tip Top Choir, and of course the cute petite crocodilian that's too adorable and fun to get around. Although the Mr. Vile Eating Challenge can really be a hassle. And always suggest playing the Xbox so you won't have to restart with every fail. So too, the cute croc has a better reach than Vile, is quicker, and the murky water won't harm you since, I guess he doesn't interfere with the native fauna. And just like any swamp and climate level, the music is quite decent here. In any swamp in this list, or any real wetland, caution is always a key factor along with precision, dedication, being wary of your surroundings, and having preparations necessary. Still though, I wonder if these worlds would connect internally, as like an adjacent neighbor to its predecessor, Clanker's Cavern. I'm the Ecron writer, and Bubble Gloop Swamp is by far the best swamp level in all of gaming. Even I think so over Xenoblade. Kind of makes me wish to see this serene open marsh again, the same one I used to be in during the field trip when I was a tween. Some specialize on the environment thing. So, tread carefully, and always rely on a true professional to guide you through those wild wetlands. Don't be swamped in the swamp.
Why is the yellow bird that sings so sweet? Which brings me back to Z, and now my alphabet's complete in the swamp. Ooh, ooh. Ribbit, ribbit.